I was pulling in all-nighter to study for my legal studies board exam, which was supposed to take place in the next 4 days. My brain was filled to the brim with concepts that dealt with everything, ranging from arbitration to reasonable restrictions on our fundamental rights to the number of women who had been appointed as senior advocates in the recent years. I was 2 units away from finally being done with my revision for good when I realized that my legal studies textbook, a textbook, mind you, crafted for adolescents or juveniles, did not even mention juvenile crime in the slightest. My classmates and I were being taught about the functioning of the International Criminal Court and tort laws, but ironically enough, we were not being taught about a criminal justice system that has us at its very core. Be it the lack of inclusion of teenagers when it comes to laws that govern them, or their lack of awareness regarding the same, one thing that juvenile justice systems all around the world need to be better at is to strike a balance between rehabilitating young detained children and affixing them with accountability that is not punitive. Now, accountability in this context refers to the fact that we award these children sentences that take their developmental changes into consideration. Rehabilitation and accountability work in tandem, especially in the case of these young offenders, wherein it means that we award these offenders sentences that are actually not as harsh and give them better resources to reintegrate into the society and become fully fledged citizens, once again, without destroying all scope for individual betterment. To understand the nuances that go behind this though, we first need to understand what juvenile crime itself means. And what can we do to enforce a system that balances rehabilitation and the accountability of these children equally well? Despite legal justice systems all around the world having put in place laws to combat the problem of juvenile delinquency, which means the violation of law by someone who is under the age of majority, there has been a steady rise in the number of delinquents, especially in the recent years. In India itself, in 2022, an official study conducted by the National Crime Records Bureau stated that our juvenile crime rate has increased to a whole of 7%. It is very interesting to note that this increase was observed after the latest amendment of the Juvenile Justice Act in 2022. The Act had also been amended once back in 2015 against the gruesome backdrop of the Nirbhaya campaign case, wherein one of the rapists involved was just a few months short of turning 18. The amendment back then stated that 16 to 18-year-olds all across the country would be punished as adults if they commit crimes as heinous as murder or rape. Despite these amendments being put in place to deter adolescents all over the world, we can still see a rise in statistics when it comes to juvenile crime. This signifies that our approach in dealing with juvenile offenders is currently failing miserably because we are too focused on punishing young people who find themselves on the wrong side of the law instead of reforming them. Now, this trend can be observed all over the world, just not in a country like ours, where we have proper juvenile correction centers functioning all over, and by legal standards, our laws even take into account the intricacies when it comes to handling juvenile offenders as compared to adults. But still, this trend can be seen even in countries as developed as the United States of America, because over there, juvenile delinquents and adult criminals are bizarrely enough housed together in state penitentiaries. And this is where juvenile delinquents get influenced by their adult counterparts. Now this trend also continues because legal justice systems all around the world do take account the age factor when it comes to legislating about juvenile justice, but they just have a one-size-fits-all theory, which is so bizarre because they do not take into account the amount of diversity they are dealing with. They do not focus that most of the children that are involved in juvenile crimes have backgrounds which are marked by a scarcity of resources to afford legal counsel. The legal approach when it comes to at-risk youth or teenagers who have lifestyles that can hinder their successful transition from adolescence to adulthood is actually quite beautiful to see that this approach is not as universal as it should have been. It is not that accommodative, it is not that inclusive. Now, when we talk about these criminals, nothing is done to improve their lives outside of the prison system. They are just sent back to the environment where they come from, and this was the very environment where they became criminals in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we lose the fight when it comes to successfully rehabilitating criminals. We hope that their rehabilitation begins in the prison system when it actually should have begun outside of it. We are too focused on punishing people who have not even reached the acme of their cognitive potency, and we blame them for the problems that the society has created for them. Until the time we do not make more legal studies textbooks that talk about juvenile crime or that introduce people to the problem that most of us do not even have textbooks to begin with, I think we have failed as a society, and we will keep failing because our society will have no longer a place for children who make mistakes and learn from them.